And we're live. So welcome back to AI in the Wild. I'm Shan Pal Singh. I'm the director of the TV Lab and faculty here at Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning. One of the interests of this lecture series has been and even here at Taubman, not just the lecture series, has been what happens when AI moves beyond the technical, being like a sort of technical novelty, and starts entering the actual workflows, aesthetics, and decision-making structures of practice. A more systemic outlook that's beyond just production and generation. But we've been asking, how do these technologies reshape, or at least begin to reshape, visual culture and the way design itself is imagined? And so today's speaker works directly in that space. Cas Esbach is a Dutch architect, educator, and founder of Cans, which one?
Either one is fine.
Okay. And currently a professor at Savannah College of Art and Design, or SCAD. Before starting his own studio, he spent more than 5 years at MBRDV in Rotterdam, where he served as a project leader on major projects across the world. At the same time, he was actively experimenting with emerging tools, AI in practice itself, giving him first-hand view of how these technologies enter the design process and how they reshape that process itself, and what kind of agency architects still retain within that shift. What makes Cass especially interesting for the series is that his work sits between the sort of large scale architectural practice and a sharp engagement with the changing role of AI in design. Across his teaching, writing, lectures, installations, he's been exploring how computational workflows might move beyond just simple tools or tool making, but actually point towards new aesthetic agendas for the discipline and new agency also, I think, for the discipline. He brings a perspective that is both speculative and grounded in practice, which makes him a great person to help us think through what AI is actually doing inside architecture right now. So thank you, Cass, for joining us today.
Yeah. Sean, thank you so much for that introduction. Actually, I think that's better than the one I wrote for myself. So send it over and I can put it on my website.
Will do.
No, but I appreciate it a lot. And what Ishan says is true, right? Coming from practice, I became obsessed with AI. And through that obsession, I kind of shifted away from practice and into academia, where now I'm an educator in SCAD. So that's also kind of the vision that I'm trying to bring and dive into with you guys. The fun thing, or what I try to do with this lecture I'm about to give you, is I'll dive into a project that I did with where we integrated AI and kind of evaluating AI aesthetics, but then that brought us into a completely different place. And then at the end, I want to end at a provocative thought, which might be extremely relevant for the students that are in this call, which I'm assuming there are students here, but also yeah, for people who are emerging into this architectural world and that we're able to re-question it in a way. So the project that I want to talk to you guys about, with you guys about, is exporting aesthetics, AI in a new architectural image. I did it with my little funny studio with Stella and Samba, and Kazu and Bosco or Danloho were also helping us with this. Um, this project kind of started a while back when I was invited to come to Wuhan and lead a tiny little research studio where we took 20, or I guess whatever the amount of people are on that list, let's say 15 people out into Wuhan, and we looked at the built environment there, where there's a lot of rotten tail buildings, so buildings that have been started and then are left unfinished. They have a rotten tail in that way. And we're using AI to experiment and visualize what we could do with those buildings. So that was a while back, and that kind of started this journey into how do we implement AI into practice or into design, right? So we're using in that field, we were using AI as a speculative tool to help us envision the future, right? Beautiful. We trained little models. We trained, everybody trained their own LoRa, some more successful than others, but that's also part of the fun, and we use those to create these visuals. We we are kind of obsessed within the architectural field with the ego of the architect, right? You see people writing papers or books about how do architects save the world? How do we say do deal with sustainability? And it's based in this idea that as architects we are central and we are going to save it and we are powerful and trust us. And if we think and look at new tools with that ego in mind, we will always be relegating the tool to being merely just an add-on because we've done it for 50 years like this. Of course, we're not going to change AI. These tools are just additions to the existing design process. Here, maybe a quick visual of a generic design process where you start with a question, you start exploring, and then at some point you're like, the deadline is in 5 weeks, so we have to make some decisions. Let's choose this one because it fits best in our ambitions. And then you go down the line and making decisions in your design process, right? Where are the doors, where down to door handles, I guess, all the way at the end here. But exploration becomes more minimal as you continue. And evaluating AI as an add-on sets it into these key moments, right? AI is great at ideation. It helps you visualize and communicate ideas quickly, easy. AI is great at knowledge sharing. And I'm kind of approaching AI as a broad tool in the, let's say, the pop culture way of approaching AI, where nobody really chooses what it really means. So here, AI is a way to sharing knowledge, right? So we set up ChatGPT tools, or I guess you can have gems on Gemini to help us understand code so that people from different cultures can work with local code without exactly knowing the language. And then you get funny questions like, can I sleep in the kitchen? Can I cook in the bedroom? But the goal, ultimate goal is people can access knowledge faster and share knowledge. AI is incredibly powerful in communication, right? You do a sketch and it becomes reality. You sketch, how do I envision the future of this building? Oh, it looks like this. It's not just this, that we as architects, we all understand this design language. But if you're going to have to show this to your client who maybe got rich by selling gravel, they don't have uh, they don't have 8 years of experience looking at sketches, but they do understand when you show them something like this, right? So it's an incredibly powerful tool for communication. Um, Good at iterative design tasks, right? Changing materials, good at fabrication, sort of good. Maybe it will be good. Relies on how you apply it, right? You have these MCPs right now, but this is just a diffusion-based 3D model, which we like to use, where we ask students to envision the future of density and then generate 3D models out of that, and then we stack those and look, oh, it's so cute and little pop. But the idea is that you're quick to build something, right? And finally, visualization, quickly testing and trying and communicating your ideas. So those are kind of the generic ways that I'm sure many people have talked about where AI can be integrated. And these are incredibly powerful efficiency gains in the design process, right? Here we are saying AI is just a co-designer. AI is a part of the efficiency improvement in your team. But slowly I started to see that there's a temptation. There's a temptation to evaluate AI not as a co-designer, but what if we evaluate AI as a lead designer, right? I've written many briefs. So I put one into ChatGPT, ask it to, I don't even read the response that it says, to be honest. I just put in the brief, sketch something, and then AI kind of asked AI to make something, and it makes a project that looks reasonably feasible. Don't look too long at anything, of course, it's kind of completely insane, but allowing AI to become a lead designer in the design process seemed to be working. Maybe not perfectly today, but definitely in the future. Um, and it seems that project generation is becoming instantaneous. And that results that makes us not just see AI as an addition to the design process, but has us reevaluate the complete design process, right? So where we're looking at this as our design process, completely entrenched by the idea that you need to finish at some point, channel the idea that AI can be an instantaneous project generator. Maybe this is what the design process would look like, right? Not just finishing quickly, but you can explore at every moment, because at each moment in this design process, you're able to extract a full project in the future, right? You're able to click and generate. click and generate. So what do people do then? What do you do if generation, the thing that you spent years learning how to do, how to make drawings, what if that falls away? What does the focus of the architect become? Well, there is a sort of a boundary that AI is not dealing with well, and that's that human to human interaction. Sitting together, touching skin to skin, looking each other in the eye, and we're shifting ourselves from let's say production to collection, data collection in the form of the data that you reference, or possibly the data that us humans share with each other, is going to be possibly the future. So the irreplaceable creative act within architecture is becoming more human, or the human to human connection. We're shifting away from product and going into process focused people. We're shifting from production to collection of information, right? So this is a nice statement, which kind of feels techno optimistic in a way where you're like, okay, we can be more human because of AI. We said, okay, what if we take that and kind of like a cross invert this idea, like the inverted evil version of this, where what if we then try to streamline everything as much as possible? And based on that, we came to this not very hard to make, but definitely very fun to make generative process where we start, where we call it data to 3D. Um, Completely limited by what's possible today in these tools, but still very much speculative about how it could become useful in the future, where we start with our input data to text, right? So this is, I don't know how much you guys are aware of this, but when you're talking about these AI tools, it's always interesting to talk about what's the input and what's the output. So our input here was data or research. Our output was text, which was then filtered through twice to refine a prompt where we're communicating with an LLM. Those texts get generated into an image. We refine those images one time over with low rank with a LoRa, so a small data set that will help focus the outputs. And then finally, we went from an image to 3D, and that's what we called data to 3D. So the idea that one of those earlier offshoots from the design process, this is what that could be. Taking Hong Kong or the GBA, the Greater Bay Area, so Shenzhen, Hong Kong, that whole area as an inspiration. We kind of started with that as our test site because, in a way, I don't know if you've walked into these offices before, where in the shelves there's 10,000 blue foam models made over 10 years, and you're like, okay, interesting. And then you walk through Hong Kong, and you're like, okay, so this is where all those blue models came to live and then slowly die away. So it's like a very exploratory city with shape and form and massing. So we kind of saw that as a really interesting place to study. And we gathered a bunch of data for this, whether it was government documents or political pieces or whatever opinion pieces. And we asked people to gather it with us until we had about 400 gigabytes of just random data related to this, and asked then a large language model to extract uh, descriptions of buildings that could emerge from the conditions described, something like that. And then it gave us a prompt. Those prompts gave us thousands of images, like an image like this, which then created a 3D or this or this or this or this or this. Or this. You get the idea. We had a lot of 3D models, and then we tried to kind of start to reevaluate it because we had created kind of this black box where we shoved everything in, and then we started to look at what came out of this weird black box that we crafted. Um, First in a Rhino model, but on my laptop it wasn't really successful. So we kind of shifted to just 2D representations, so back a step in a way. Maybe it's not super fair, but definitely funny that we then through our own interpretation. So maybe this isn't so honest. We then created a map, like a Game of Thrones style map here of different ideas. And then as a joke, we named them all. So as we now try and walk through this new created landscape based on the data that generated the prompts, that generated the images, that generated the 3D models. So looking at that map, we see these titles for big cities in there. We have the generic towers, more utopian. And then as you move along through this little area here, you go into this biomimicry zone or the super biomimicry, and then into this dystopian, and finally, yeah, this was really fun. There was a whole, I don't know, we couldn't really trace back where this came from, but somebody was writing about sort of like this retro castle, futuristic, techno, AI overlord area. And that became like over 200 generated evil castles, which is very funny to see. And finally, this techno optimistic, right? And then a weird island here, we called it collapsed infrastructures, where apparently some papers were writing about the future being quite grim. Um, and we imagine it's possibly related to the low quality of the building products of some of those towers, which then resulted in many generations looking more dystopian and destroyed, giving us this weird island, right? Um, and then we took four of the key ones that we enjoyed the most or we thought were most relevant and extracted those. So whether it's energy optimized, density optimized, biomimicry through form or biomimicry through systems, like how it generates energy. We took those, sent them to a 3D printer, and very cute, 3D printed those, sent them back once because they were very yellow. Like when you try to build these things, or it's very hard to build anything across the sea where you can only see through pictures that the builder sends you. And then you look at these things, you're like, oh my God, please fix it. And then well, finally we had four beautiful visions of the future of AI. Oh, I have a little pop-up, sorry. And finally, this picture was the nicest one that somebody sent to me. They were like referencing the idea that what we're writing about our future in Hong Kong is not actually what's being built. And that was very interesting to see that the difference between the data collected, the future envisioned, that AI envisioned, and then what's the reality of the built environment, that they're so clashing. So what does this reveal? So that was our project, very fun. What does this reveal about the adjusted design process? Well, this one we looked at, it becomes about the collection, but the truth was when we started implementing it and implementing it in our most evil way, we came to a more compressed design process where we spent about 2 hours collecting data, 2 days, which was a little bit of setting up the model and then hitting run over and over 15,000 times, setting those. And then final, the human to human moment is where we selected which ones we wanted to be printed, right? So all at once, a design process, which would have taken far longer in a more generic moment where you're spending time thinking, evaluating, rethinking, continuously generating, making choices, and then seeing the deadline come in, and you're okay. So that normal process all at once became down to just 2 days and 4 hours, which, yeah, I don't know. Still not sure what the truth is or what the positive or negative is about this, but the conclusion doesn't change, right? The irreplaceable creative act still is that human to human contact. It's not like we would have felt comfortable letting the AI send something to the printer without our evaluation, but we chose to evaluate it ourselves. Um, um, but what we did feel comfortable with was giving out of hands the role of production in our design process. When you think back many years, you would be making a drawing by hand on a piece of paper, right? Then CAD came along. You're doing it way faster. And all at once, this efficiency gain is becoming so much that actually production or creation of work that represents architecture is becoming less and less important, possibly, right? But what does this mean? So now for you guys as students, I'm assuming, I don't see anybody, but I'm assuming you're students that I'm talking to. What does this mean about that future that you're walking into and possibly going to be a part of this change? Well, evaluating a standard firm structure with somebody at the top, let's call them the founding partner, managing partners, associates, and then this big slab of architects, juniors, media, senior architects, project leaders, kind of at the filling out this pyramid. We see that the amount of work that's able to be done by a full team can now be done by possibly one person who's very good at this one tool. I don't know how to feel about that. So we're seeing the pyramid possibly being restructured into this rhombus type shape, where then the role of the people that receive the AI information or the AI slop in a way changes from an active agent or a participant in the design process to more of a janitor. I would call the new associate architect or junior partner the AI janitors. I think that's a new job description that we could see happening in the future, bringing us to a far more optimized, or I don't know, kind of disappointing rhombus in the future, right? And then when your client comes in and evaluates this design process and falls in love with the junior actually doing the work, possibly the whole rhombus will collapse, right? Agency in the design process is gonna be, yeah, the thing that we're gonna struggle the most with in the future. And having control and making sure that the added value of you as designers is understood by the people that you're working for, um, is going to be tough to communicate well, right? And then this stupid meme, I thought it was funny to put it in there. The intern that knows the AI or that's able to um, increase the efficiency in the design process so much, so that they will carry the design process, right? And then in a way, the control that the producer or the AI controller, the AI handler has over the design process is going to be far stronger than anybody else in the team. Um, and yeah, I don't. That's kind of where I end this, because it's not really much more that I can say about this, but that there is a future ahead of us where AI integration is incredibly shocking, incredibly powerful, incredibly weird. And though I am in a way skeptical about the AI optimized future within architecture, it is also an opportunity for you as young architects to regain control over the design process, to sidestep existing processes where, oh, through merit you get hired, then this, then that, then in 7 years you might become a senior project leader, and then you have to, you are allowed to say something in the design process. Well, maybe next year already, after you've graduated, you can start saying something about the design process. If you're a critical designer making optimized use of these AI tools within the design process, I think the agency you have over the design will be far more than people who sit downstream in the design process. So kind of a negative ending, but also possibly an optimistic one. I don't know. I think that's where I would like to leave it, Ishan, if you're still here, or if I'm
I am.
talking into
I'm.
the
I'm.
ether.
I'm right here. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's where I'll leave it.
This is great. You've left with a lot more provocations rather than conclusions. So I have so many questions about these. By the way, students, whoever wants to ask a question, just come along over here. But I'm going to
Yeah.
start with a couple of questions because I mean you took us really quickly through a lot of your work. So thank you for that. Like just showing, showcasing generously like what you've been up to with these tools. What's funny is in the class that we're doing all here together, we're also using Comfy UI, similar workflows, trying to figure out. We're sort of prodding these diffusion models, trying to do like iterative prompting, for example, like changing one word and seeing what changes within the image, or where does it's like sort of not necessarily, well, yeah, it's bit biases lie, but then also using things like control net in order to
Yeah.
understand agency, our own agency within the process. And so I have questions for your own one of the things that I want to understand more is you had mentioned data to text. I mean, might not have caught this. Could you explain what like the data was that you started from?
Yeah, so we took about 400 gigabytes of Word documents. So usually they would come in as PDFs. So let's say the government had written a vision plan on a specific area within the GBA, the Greater Bay Area. We would take that, extract all the text from that file, and insert that into a Word document. And that Word document, ended up being extremely large and filled up with information, and that we kind of put into we connected that to a large language model. So the large language model was connected to kind of an unfiltered set of existing data. It felt more, what our intention was, is to be this evil AI integrator where we said, we don't even care what's in the data. We don't care what's happening with it. We're just gathering as much as we can. So there were, to be honest, there was government documents in there. There was opinion articles in there. There was research papers we found that we put in there, everything that we could gather kind of by scraping the web in a way.
Hmm. Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, we've been looking into we've used similar like text to image workflows and image to image workflows in LoRa's and things like that. But I'm really interested in trying to figure out how do we now, especially with agentic AI, for example, like how do we start to actually get real world data and then apply them into these workflows? Because I think sometimes these things can be let's call it like not rigged to a kind of
Mhm.
reality. And I think integrating data is really like smart way of going about that because now it's picking from something that's actually been collected rather than your own assumptions about maybe the future of Hong Kong and things like that. So that's really interesting. I was curious about you said you've been training Laura's and we've been doing the same over here. And it's I think I've seen that you mentioned before that firms, for example, could be doing this for their own work, right? Like could be training their own LoRa's or their own work, and then have a model that's like that starts to create new versions of the work. But what would you say about getting stuck in a feedback loop in that process? Like you are only sort of like producing at some point or regurgitating the same work that you've already done in the past. And do you see Laura just trapping you in that space, or maybe in some way finding new directions out of that?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to say. So evaluating it from the perspective of you as a human being and wanting to be a creative person, I would say don't use LoRa's at all, or if you do, use them to expand your exploratory possibilities. So don't overtrain it on, let's say, key architects that you enjoy, because that makes your life very boring. Um, for in the firm perspective, where they are in a way most of the time regurgitating visions that have already been done 60 times by that firm, and they're just doing it in a new situation, it could be very beneficial to integrate Aurora because maybe they're less worried about being inventive or creative and more worried about sticking within the vision that has defined their success in the past. So there does make sense in a way to engage with Allura. But as a critical designer, I would push you all to find what makes you a human being. Because as architects, I'm sure many of you have a nice camera, you go out on vacation to architectural things, and you take beautiful pictures. So why not train Allura on those pictures that say something to you? And be okay with the fact that then it messes up the outputs in a way. It won't be as good as an untrained a model not trained on the morals, but it will be something that is important for you and that you can then integrate in your design process, right? It should, I think what I would always preach is don't use the outputs of an AI as your final output. That final output of something should always be touched by you or integrated by you in the design process, but you can use it as some type of Pinterest on steroids, right? But a Pinterest which is trained on your data set, the data set that you crafted and that you care about. I think that's what I would push. Um, and then people get scared about, oh, but AI is changing every 10 weeks. And yeah, true, you're right. You have to retrain your LoRa for every new model. Or maybe it's okay to just get stuck in your SD 1.5 or SD 1.4, which is now already years and years old, workflow, as long as it helps you be more creative and be more exploratory. I think that's important. Um,
Yeah.
so in a way, use LoRa's, but also don't, or I don't know, just find what works for you in your design process.
Yeah, we've been using it specifically to sort of see where the model. So one, we when I planning this course, I started off with, saying that okay, I'm going to train Laura on Flux ones, and then in the middle of the course they release Flux two, and I'm like, oh, should I switch? So I know exactly what you mean with we stuck to Flux one. We're like, no, let's stick to the older model because I think it actually still does a great job. But we're looking at like sort of looking at where the Flux models don't take us automatically? Like, where is a sort of missing part of these models, and trying to use LoRa's to sort of see if we can build a data set that does not exist, or take it to a bias that does not currently appear in the model, and sort of test it out again. Like, where it's an exploratory process to figure out where we're what, even asking questions of value like you are of these of this process. And so you said something about a critical designer, and I'm, with Laura training, and even some of the work that you had showcased us was like this process of like where your students or you all were building massive data sets and then sort of like putting the data sets through the models. I'm wondering, like, does that not feel then more like a curator? And I know you push against that, like we should not just be curators, but even in your new diagram of you use this word, the new diagram of the firm, you use this word saying if architects as evaluators. Is that not one, a process of curation, but also hasn't process of curation always been part of architecture design? Like, this is not new. We've always, like, when we start a project, we create what they call mood boards, things like that, look at other work. Like, we've always participated as curators. Does this not just expand that part of our job?
Yes, I agree. I think in a way, the curation is the key part of our job. Having good taste and being good at having good taste and communicating that taste well is maybe the most important thing. It's more important than drawing a good drawing or making it structurally sound. People will help you with that. I think Remco has said something about good buildings leak or something. It just means he didn't spend so much time on detailing. He spent more time on curation and evaluation and thinking and adjusting. And um, but I don't want to overvalue that job too much, the curator, and that's why I kind of rebranded it as more of a janitor, especially in the age of AI, where generation is so much easier. But let's say non-critical generation of options is very easy, and you can not, like I've had students, so we're doing something similar where we're evaluating different models, different prompting styles, and then I get a receive documents with 700 images made in two sessions of 2 hours. I don't think that's critical creation, but it is creation in a way. And then selection within that data set, or that selection of those images, which one's good and which one's bad, is curation, but it feels more like you're cleaning up than that you're actually curating something through knowledge and through being a critical curator. So I agree. I think there is something to be said about architects as curators in the future. I think that's interesting. But because creation is becoming so much easier, I think it's more like being a janitor where you're mainly making sure that you're throwing away all the bad stuff. And I want to say one more little thing about what I mean with critical designer. It's not a term I made up or anything. I think it's from Jim Evers from Clemson. I think he's the chair there. He said it, that it's not about educating it's not about educating designers, but it's about educating critical designers. I think that's important to be aware of what that means. That means that when you're designing something, it's also your opportunity to say something. A design question or an RFP or an RFQ, which is a request for a project, right? Those documents are not asked to fill in their program on a site, but they're asking you to say something bigger about the world, about the state of architecture, the state of life, and what life should be like, possibly. And I think that's what that critical design means. So that's also where I think critical curation, I think, will come in. So maybe that's a new thought in a way, where if you can, yeah, I don't know. It's a tough moment to be in where we are right now, Ishan, because we're in a place where these tools are good. Are they good enough? No, not yet. Will they be good enough? Yeah, for sure. But how will they be integrated? We don't know. And the firms that are most successful today are not integrating it like design process changes, but they're integrating it as add-ons to the design process they already have, because that's been functioning well for them so far. So I'm seeing more and more small firms come in and really be able to do large projects because they're willing to be AI optimistic. But Yeah, I don't know what the future holds. It's I don't know. That's also why I ended on this slide. Or yeah, I don't know. I'm going in a tangent now, but
No.
maybe if there's a question from a student or somebody that can, or somebody who's very angry. I hope there's somebody angry actually.
Yeah, I'm waiting for someone to walk by, but
Oh, okay.
but I think that there's yeah, I in your diagram about, like how like process is like it starts to become like you can do the process. There's a lot more messiness in the process, or there like the process can last for longer and so on because you can sort of generate at a scale that you couldn't before. I think that like it's interesting because like for me when I'm designing, it's like the only thing that stops my process is the deadline. Like otherwise I would never stop designing, right? And that's sort of the fear of, or at least my fear of like generation, is that like there's like you can do this so easy now, but you can continuously do this, but then there has to be maybe what you were talking about with like taste right now is like there has to be something to rub it against, like friction, like because when process, with like sketching things like that, the process was slow like a while back, so there's boredom involved in process, there's things like reflection involved in process, but with generation, how do we create space for that? Like how do we create space for maybe giving ourselves friction in some ways is what I've been trying to think about more recently.
Yeah. And then the tougher question is that friction just because we like to have friction and we're excited by it? Because that's also what this slide I feel kind of pushes the idea towards is a client doesn't care about friction sometimes. They just want their building to be cool, to be look good so they can show their friends, and they want to make sure that they're earning enough money on it. Like their goal isn't to be, let's say, academically relevant, which is kind of
For
sad.
sure. Yeah, yeah.
Um, so maybe what we'll see, and there is a Sam Hyde, which is this horrible alt-right thinker, but he was talking about AI doesn't really ruin the space for good design. The only thing it does ruin is the space for mediocre design. So let's say I think he was mainly critical about the artists that design the Facebook logos and stuff like not the Facebook logo, but the diagrams on Facebook when something is loading or something like that. He thought it was very boring. And you think, well, that should be replaced by AI. It's not relevant that a human is doing that. So
Hmm.
maybe there's something to that that we should be focused on becoming really good critical designers, good communicators, good psychologists, and then understanding how to bring relevant design further. Because the generic design, the hotel, the Hilton, the 600 and millionth Hilton in, let's say, a small city in the USA, like, yeah, maybe it doesn't need to have critical design. Maybe it's fine if it's just functional. People just need to go there before their flight, or something like this. So
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know. It's the future is strange, I think, and I'm very interested where it will go.
Hmm. Wait, we have a student who has a question, so I'm gonna move
Sure.
him.
I appreciate you sharing your work, Cas. I think something that comes to mind when you talk about, especially like a data-based input system, it seems like a really localized form of design. Like you're working on this synthesis of all these things that are out there, be it like ordinances or articles. It makes me wonder about like projectively kind of like positionality. Like I feel like that's part of the workflow that could become like part of critical design in terms of like positioning all of these things that are out there to achieve something that doesn't exist, that might be based in some of those localized things, but as part of the evolution of the design, like how do you foresee, or like are you looking to develop the tools for then like that positionality to be introduced, or do you foresee yourself engaging in that process in some way?
Yeah, interesting to think about because why should we even care if there is a position in the data, or should we? Is that's kind of what you're asking is how do we integrate more of a design position in the data that we're gathering?
Yeah, I mean, I think the data is inherently like the synthesis of a lot of positions and might reflect what's already out there, but Like as the designer, is there kind of an input that changes that positionality or tailors it or biases it in some way towards like a
Yeah.
particular future that you imagine?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Um, I don't know if because this is kind of the thing, like you're saying, should we have maybe more of a deliberate bias in the project or something, right?
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if there is. Um, it's very hard to think about that because do I care whether there's bias in the data, or do I want there to be bias in the data? In a way, this project that I showed you, hold on, let me go back a few slides. Oh, it's not on the screen. But in a way, that map, that Game of Thrones map that I showed you guys, was kind of an evaluation of the biases in the data that we fed into this model, assuming that the model is completely honest and open, right? But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. You could think about, it's easy to integrate specific positions and a more opinionated input into the data and to work through that. And I think maybe you're right. Okay. So I think you're right. We should have more of a position in the data that we selected. But we chose not to. We chose to be the laziest, most evil designers in a way, and sit back and do as little work as possible, also as a provocation in this moment. But if you were to integrate it, I think it would be really smart to choose specifically what data you're using to train your model on, right? That is the last bit of control that you have over the design process. You are a curator of data. I think maybe that's what's more interesting. You're not so much a curator of the output of the AI tool, but you're a curator of the input that gets fed into the AI tool, and that's where critical curation should be. And critical design happens only in the communication to the client, where you're like, hey, these three designs we think are valid based on all the critical data that we selected as an input to our well-trained AI model. So I think that could be a very interesting way to research it. I think, yeah. But then again, I used to read these anthropological books, and then at the start or at the end, there would always be a little chapter about the author describing themselves to make sure that we understand the perspective that they bring to the anthropological research that they're doing, right? But yeah, those authors were all crazy, and they don't think they always knew who they were themselves, and you only later kind of figure out what type of inherent biases they were pulling with them. Maybe what we should do as designers is not always try to figure out exactly what all the biases are, but be comfortable in designing with the biases that we have and accepting them as the truths that we have to deal with. Um, and maybe that also adds the flavor to your design in a way that I think your design should be based on who you are as a person and what you bring to the table, and maybe not what all the other people are writing. So. Yeah, I don't know if I answered any bit of your question, but I think
No,
there's something interesting there to dive into, and I would be totally willing to share my workflow with you if you want to take a stab at it and see where you can bring it to.
yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks for that response. There's yeah the I think that's a kind of question that we are all I mean, no, we are all at, but there's the wrestling with the bias, and I think I agree that there's like kind of a I mean, part of education is that we are training a certain kind of bias, our own biases towards, like things like what we mentioned before, good taste and all. So at some point, we have to say, okay, should we trust ourselves, or should we keep trying to remove our own voice for some kind of, I don't know, middle ground that might not actually be that productive?
Yeah, it relies kind of the goal of what you're trying to create. Are you trying to create a better future for all? Maybe then try to make sure that you're taking account of all peoples and all perspectives and sustainability and diversity and this and that. Or are you trying to craft an iconic shopping mall in Dubai? Maybe then the better future for all is less relevant, which is kind of sad, but it is the truth, right? Because
Right.
you're trying to work in a very specific environment. Or maybe it's even nice, we can say it's nicer, you're trying to craft social housing for a specific group of people, like refugees, and you're trying to craft a housing where you have refugees and students that live together. Well, you need to be hyper biased and hyper opinionated to make sure that the vision that you're applying isn't working for everybody, but it's working specifically for those people. And you should really try to understand those people and their biases and what they bring with them. So yeah, it can be positive and negative in a way.
Right. And do you think so I actually have I I've been I've spoken to a couple of firms about the kind of work that they're interested in using AI for, and it's interesting. It's like less about sort of generation or imagery or things like that. They more are interested in, and this is coming from a small few people that I've spoken to. They're more interested in more organizing their systems rather than using AI for generation. Is that something you also are seeing, or I don't know? I'm interested in what kinds of uses you've seen in practice that maybe might surprise you, that might be different from things that we've been seeing in like just general population of like using stable diffusion models to create AI images. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think that is indicative of, let's say, a corporate or practice environment where people see themselves as having the ego of the architect, where I want an AI to, cook my food so I can hang out at the beach more, or this type of, or I wish it would sort my files so I don't have to do my stupid emailing, right? And I get it. I understand that that's the inclination, but maybe we should even rethink whether sorting of documents is necessary in the future, or if we should even, because let's say these multimodal AI tools are becoming so powerful, so good, like maybe we don't have to even doubt about how we store files, and anybody can work in any way, and it becomes much more flexible and free. So when I look at firms and how they're implementing it, it's always very much in let's keep what we have the same, but make it a little bit better. Let's use incremental changes. But I think, especially with AGI coming up pretty soon, or something that fakes being AGI well enough that we're all convinced, we will have to reevaluate our whole life design processes, right? And that's also why I'm most interested in how students are implementing it right now, or will start to implement it, because they might um, yeah, I think you have to be almost like a new baby, be born, and then learn about how these tools work as you're growing older, and then integrate it in a way, because it's hard to predict how it will happen, or because we're also stuck in our own way of doing it. And in my heart, I don't even want to say it. I do it like, yeah, I think architects are important, and we should be still making our drawings, and I cannot have an AI take my job, right? I don't want that, but yeah, maybe an AI tool is much more useful for a student to talk with about their design than talking with me, because the AI tool can be quicker, more supportive, more like it can give the student what they need in their design process at that time. So yeah, I don't know. I think the way firms are integrating it are always a bit boring, and a bit stuck by asking questions like, is it legal? Is it, what do we do with copyright? How do we keep our data secure? And I think they're all relevant questions for a time, which is now, but maybe not for a time for in 5 years. Maybe in 5 years, we will completely rethink what ownership of an idea will be, because maybe there is no ownership of no copyright possible anymore, because we're all training on everything, and everything's already trained on, and it's all gone. So yeah, I don't know. The future is very confusing and very exciting, I think.
Yeah, the like I think that like there's always been a kind of a difference of thinking about copyright between like like Eastern and Western economic systems, and I think it's
Yeah.
interesting that there's like that this is breaking the the Western idea of IP apart. Especially you see like even these days where with things like DeepSeek and all, like we're getting models that are more efficient, but they're all like sort of there's less resistance towards ideas of copyright in those parts of the world that
Yeah.
help propagate maybe even more like we talk about like energy uses of these models, but like I'm seeing better models coming from like places where they are a lot freer with ideas of copyright. And I think that there's also like this idea that like what you're talking about with firms, and I think a lot of what your responses have been is like maybe pointing towards not issues with AI itself, but like issues with like the architecture profession that as it's had for a while, and that these technologies are sort of maybe revealing or like bringing that to the surface, saying like this is not actually, this is always where the problem is. It's always been a problem that we've been thinking that like our design agency lies in the 50th Hilton on the side of the road, rather than like that a different way of participating. And I think that like maybe that might look like the architect's role might actually change. Maybe we aren't just making, I don't know, facades in Revit. Like there's something else we're contributing to with these models.
Yeah, and I think I want to make sure that people understand it's not the future that I want to happen. I would much rather have a future where we're all um, enjoying our life and sitting in the sun enough and learning what we're excited to learn and kind of this life without hyper capitalism or something. But there is kind of this unfortunate truth that it's coming, and it's going to be important for us all to be ready for these big changes that are happening. But I will also, and kind of as my last note, say that my partner, Sandra, who is also part of this project, sees this all very differently. So where I am in a way like super, like everything's going to change, be careful, blah, blah, blah. I'm sort of alarmist, techno, negative, and all at the same time. And Sandra, she says to me, it's like BIM, it'll be a specialism within the architectural field, and nothing will change. And there is a lot of validity to that as well. She works at a firm that's very much about tactile design and communicating and thinking and dreaming and drawing beautiful diagrams and thinking about them. So it's good to be aware that my opinion and maybe Ishan, we're both kind of in the same thought process. There's also other thoughts about that which are positive still, but see AI as a specialism and not something to be obsessed over, or even to you can learn it just to know how it works, and then yeah, find your own voice in design. And maybe it's model making, and maybe it's sketching, and that's also fine. And don't lose yourself out of fear of the future that I'm sketching for you now, maybe. So I wanted to kind of end on that.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I really appreciate. I want to see about like 50 generations of that future that you're sketching for us right now. So hope you can set that along.
Oh my God, I'm so worried, but it will be fine. We'll be fine. Don't worry.
No, I really appreciate this conversation, and thank you so much for exposing us to all the work that you showed us. And you've given us a lot to deliberate on. So thanks again, Cas, for joining.
Yeah. And one more thing, if with people there and maybe people not there watching this at different times, don't be scared to reach out. I'm always open to hear ideas and thoughts, and reach out on Instagram or LinkedIn or whatever you want. I love being challenged, thinking together, because my thought process, like today, just speaking my thoughts out loud and hearing your guys' responses also makes me think more. And I think that's how we can, keep learning. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And on the note of the Creative Commons, we'll share our Comfy UI workflows after this.
Of course.
See you. Thank you so much.
Okay, see you, man. Bye-bye.
Bye.